So this video is going to be about the misuse of the word Gnosticism by Eric Voegelin, who is this 20th century philosopher, and by James Lindsay, who is more of a recent figure who appeared on the political scene, basically. And the misuse is kind of obvious, basically, because it is attributed to Marxism, to wokeism. This is in the case of James Lindsay. If we look at Voegelin, we have also positivism, we have fascism, oddly enough, we have psychoanalysis and progressivism. So, why is this a problem? Because, I mean, to the person who is actually educated in these topics, this is clearly not the case. But to someone who is not really that educated, this might seem plausible, at least at some level. So, Voegelin wrote two books: The New Science of Politics, and Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. And I went through the second one and found like an attempt to define what Gnosticism is in the introduction. So I'm going to read that attempt. So Gnosticism is the experience of the world as an alien place into which man has strayed and from which he must find his way back to the other world of his origin. Now, is this definition actually correct? It's a fair definition. It's not a complete one. And we can find like this kind of thinking also in a lot of other places, a lot of other religions and philosophies. Basically, if you look at a religion of the past or at spirituality in general, this view kind of fits in with those philosophies or religions. So look at Platonism, for example. So you have kind of dualism there. So, like in the Timaeus, when man was created, he was assigned to a certain star, and he would come to Earth to live as a man incarnated, or a woman, and after he died, he would return to that star. If he had behaved like immorally or something like that, he would reincarnate as a woman and then as a beast. In like other dialogues, you have the myth of the cave, which kind of shows you this dualism of the physical world and the world of forms or ideas, which kind of coincides with the Gnostic view. Why does it coincide? Because in the Gnostic view, you have the world, the physical world, the world created by the demiurge, and then you have the world of pleroma, the spiritual world, basically. And one is evil, bad, badly constructed, basically, and the other is like the source, the actual world from which the demiurge was born. I mean, he was born from Sophia, who is in the pleroma, and so on. But again, look at Platonism, and look at what, for example, James Lindsay is saying, that the Gnostics viewed this world as a prison. So here you have the alienation. What did Socrates say? That the body is the prison of the soul. So it's not something that is actually unique to Gnosticism. Gnosticism might push a little further this idea, like to the extremes a bit, because also in Christianity you kind of have the same view, but it's a bit more tamed, basically. What does the Christ say? That my kingdom is not of this world. So what does this mean, basically? I mean, you can interpret this in a Gnostic way, and that's what the Gnostics kind of did. They were Christians, so yeah, so they had the basis to do that. So, and in other traditions, you have the world as Maya, as samsara, as illusion. So the world meaning the physical world. So again, it's not particularly Gnostic. It's not a particularly Gnostic view, this of being alienated in regards of this world. I mean, you can find it also elsewhere. Gnosticism has also other traits. Voegelin, in the same introduction, tries to add some more qualities, attributes to the Gnostic view. But he does it in a weird way, so I quote him here. The aim always is destruction of the old world and passage to the new. Is this a Gnostic trait? Like, Lindsay says the exact same words, though he doesn't quote Voegelin, but says the exact same things, and attributes it to Gnosticism. Which Gnosticism? I mean, I think there's only one Gnosticism, but anyway, is it present in the Gnosticism of the 1st and 2nd centuries? It's not. No. I mean, the Gnostics were viewed as the keepers of the old wisdom. They weren't viewed as the bringers of a new ideology, a new politics, or any of that kind. I mean, the Christians were viewed more as that than the actual Gnostics, because the Gnostics, like in regards of like astrology, for example. So if you read Hippolytus of Rome, there's a mockery of astrology. Like, it's dismissed. It's superstition, basically. Like, it's the same modernist view that you can find in Hippolytus of Rome, who was this proto-Orthodox, who wrote about the Gnostic heresies, basically. And what do you have in the Gnostics? Well, you still have astrology, but they claim that they have this secret kind of astrology because when the Christ came, the stars changed direction, basically, and so everything was reversed in some way, and only they had that knowledge. So it's an interesting view, but the Gnostics were like the more Hellenistic side of Christianity. They tried to maintain some of those ideas, also Platonism and so on. And this, I'm referring to Harnack's analysis here, but it's not only his. And the proto-Orthodox, on the other hand, they were trying to tie themselves to Judaism more. So that's why there was that difference between the God of the Old Testament being the demiurge in the Gnostic view, and the God of the Old Testament being the real God in the Proto-Orthodox view. So because there was also this Hellenistic and Judaic divide, basically, within Christianity, the early Christianity, basically. So again, what is Voegelin describing here? It's nothing like it's not Gnosticism. It's not the Gnosticism of the 1st and 2nd century. Then we have, like, if we keep reading the book, we encounter Marx at a certain point, and he calls him a speculative Gnostic, like out of nowhere. He is this speculative Gnostic. Why is he a speculative Gnostic? we don't know. I mean, based on the definition he gave, it doesn't make sense, because then he goes on to say what Marx's philosophy is, and it's exactly the opposite of Gnosticism. So, side note, I really do not recommend this book, so because it's really bad. But also, he tries to give some definitions at the beginning in the introduction, and then in the second part of the book he says that, well, definitions aren't important, so it's not important to give a definition of Gnosticism because, I don't know, it's not actually explained why. I mean, he attempts to give some explanation, but it's weird. So we have Marx, who is an atheist, Marx, who is a materialist, who is against a metaphysical view of things, who is a Gnostic, apparently, but we also have Nietzsche, who is a Gnostic, according to Voegelin. Why? Doesn't make sense. I mean, again, then we have Hegel. With Hegel, I mean, I could understand why Hegel. Yeah, Hegel makes a bit more sense, though he wasn't a Gnostic. He wasn't, but he had a different framework on which he worked. So that was closer to the Gnostic framework because it was spiritual in nature, basically. Then he calls also Heidegger Gnostic. Yes, it's completely weird. I have some notes here because there are really a lot of things which went in this book, and I want to analyze all the mistakes that I find. But to be fair, there are also some parallels. I mean, if you look, he points out correctly that in Marxism and in modernity, basically, there's this symbol of Prometheus, basically. And Prometheus is this titan who brought the fire of knowledge to humanity. He is basically Lucifer. He is the serpent in the Garden of Eden. It's the same figure. It's symbolically the same figure. And if you look at the Gnostic myths and Gnostic interpretation of Genesis, you'll see that the serpent is actually a helper, a liberator in some way. Or at least he is instrumental in helping man liberate himself. He might be like a being sent by Sophia or something like that. In some Gnostic myths, he might have more negative connotations. It depends also on the Gnostic sects. We use the word Gnosticism a lot to indicate the sects, the Christian sects of the 1st and 2nd centuries, but actually they didn't held the same exact views. There were nuances and differences between them. So yeah, and this Prometheus figure kind of makes you think of Luciferianism, and there are parallels between Luciferianism and Gnosticism, but Luciferianism is somewhat vague. Basically, it has some positive aspects to it, but ultimately there's a major difference, and it's like Luciferianism uses Lucifer as a symbol, basically, of liberation and so on, but it doesn't have the same metaphysical structure as Gnosticism, and probably isn't as Christian. I mean, the Gnostics were Christians. They recognized Christ as being God, basically. So yeah, that's a major difference. So there's another part where Voegelin does something which is kind of frustrating. I mean, you see the level of sophism in Vogelin's work here, because he quotes Hegel at a certain point, and he says that Hegel says that we have to go from love of knowledge to actual knowledge, and the word he uses in German is Wissen, which is knowledge basically, and it has to be translated with knowledge because that's the word. But what Voegelin does, I mean, it's like let's go back to the Greek words. Let's go back a little and let's translate love of knowledge with philosophy, and then let's translate actual knowledge with gnosis. And there you have it. You have the transition between from philosophy to gnosis. So Hegel was a Gnostic. There you have it. That's the ultimate proof. That's really a work of sophism. I mean, you can use any other word rather than gnosis to translate wissen. You just use knowledge, and it would not have the same effect. Basically, like it's weird because let's look, for example, at the definition of gnosis, because it's actually crucial, and this is the point where there's a total difference between Gnosticism and Marxism and all the other ideologies that Voegelin and Lindsay claim that they are basically Gnostic. So, what is Gnosis? It's secret knowledge of spiritual mysteries. Secret knowledge of spiritual mysteries. So, spiritual mysteries is an essential component of Gnosis. So, this is Gnosis as a term which is now in the culture and has been used in the culture as such for a lot of time, basically. If you go and read like the ancient Greek, and in the Greek context, it might have some other kind of connotation maybe, but this is the way we use it now. And we use it usually linked with Gnosticism as a historical phenomenon, basically. So what Lindsay does, let's go a little to Lindsay now. Like let's leave Voegelin. We will return because he says something about humanitizing the eschaton, but we will return immediately to that. So let's go to Lindsay a bit. He claims that the wokeists have this secret kind of knowledge, basically, and they have their gnosis, and that's like a parallel that he found between the Gnostics and the postmodern left people, basically. But where's the spiritual mysteries part of that? Nowhere. And where's the actual secret knowledge of the postmodern left? There's none. There's like, you can say there's a cryptic language they use. That's not secret knowledge. That's just a way of expressing themselves in a cryptic way. Maybe, I don't know, to be taken a bit more seriously. That's what Foucault claimed, at least. But anyway, so let's return to Voegelin and Voegelin and his immanentizing the eschaton. So is this a Gnostic concept? No, it's not. No. What's the goal of the the Gnostic, of the actual Gnostic. It's to escape the world. It's not to change it. It's not the attitude like, oh, I don't like the world, so I have to turn it upside down and change it. No, there's nothing of that kind in Gnosticism. The eschaton, the let's say, bringing about the utopia, because that's what the eschaton is. The utopia on earth is something which actually happens in modern ideologies. It happens in communism. And you have this awakening of the eschaton also in Christianity, which, by the way, should be physical. At least the resurrection of the bodies is physical, as described by Thomas Aquinas. So it's the physical body which resurrects, and its eternal life is gonna be incarnated, basically, in the body. So, yeah, this is not to say that monetizing the eschaton is like a Christian trait, basically, because what Voegelin means is that you voluntarily try to bring about utopia. So again, it's not something which we find in actual Gnosticism. So the problem is that people like Voegelin and James Lindsay, they use this term Gnostic in a very arbitrary way, so that it actually loses its real meaning. And I'm not the first who actually notices this. I'm not the first who actually criticizes them for this. So there was this historian of religions, Ioan Petru Culianu, who was Eliade's student, basically. Mircea Eliade, the famous historian of religions. And he wrote a book. I know the title in Romanian. I can try to translate it. It's on the Gnostic traditions on the dualistic Gnostic traditions of the West, basically. And he has a chapter where he basically describes the same phenomena that I'm describing to you now. The association of Gnosticism to modern ideologies, basically. And it's not only Voegelin. There were many other thinkers, sociologists, and other philosophers who kind of came to the same conclusion. And I wrote a translation of that, of a passage from that chapter, like the final conclusion that he makes after talking about the history of this kind of thinking, basically. So I'm gonna read it to you to see what his reaction was. So remember, this is an actual historian of religion, so and an important one. So for the humble historian who concerns himself with Gnosticism, so much attention accorded to his subject of study is flattering. Rightly speaking, he doesn't believe his own eyes when he sees that the world has been invaded by the same Gnostics, whom, poor in numbers and always persecuted, could at most hope to exert a somewhat intellectual fascination upon a few of the eminent spirits of their time and nothing more. To be fair, the negation of the ecosystemic intelligence and the entropic principle put forward by them had constituted a provocation within a provocation which was unknown to all the consecrated traditions. Judging by these criteria, we don't know if all the systems of ideas included by Taubes, Voegelin, and Topisk, and the others in the concept of Gnosticism rightly appear there. Marx, for example, is a daring evolutionist, and the thought of a devolution would probably provoke a sense of horror to him. Yes. Moreover, he is as anti-metaphysical as it gets, whereas the Gnostics were the prime supporters of metaphysics. So this is a huge difference. So a really big difference. So let's continue. The natural determinism established by Engels after a primitive dialectic glorifies the possibilities of matter to create intelligence. Open parenthesis. So matter is not only good, but it is also wise without being self-aware. So again, the Gnostics viewed matter and the world as being evil. In Marxism, we have materialism and matter is good. And continuing that sentence, so close parenthesis, and those of intelligence to modify matter. Man is the perfect product of nature, which he feels he is capable of perfecting without ceasing. To the degree to which someone can talk about an opposition against nature, this is dialectical. It leads to reconciliation. As we can see, Gnosticism doesn't really work that well as an analogous model for Marxism. It doesn't. It's not compatible. It's not Gnostic. Marx wasn't a Gnostic. Rightly speaking, the myths disseminated by Hegel and Marx do not present any of the striking characteristics of the Gnostic myths. They do not. They are completely different. And I'm going to go into the details of this because James Lindsay also tries to make this connection between the demiurge and the bourgeois class. Somehow the bourgeois class is the demiurge now, and it's a totally mistaken metaphor. It's a totally out of touch metaphor to make. Like, let's continue. The only philosopher to whom a comparison with the actual Gnosticism would be admissible is probably Kant, Immanuel Kant. The one from Religion Within the Bounds of Bare Reason. That's a book he wrote, where he displays a dualistic anthropology. Man is evil through nature, but he has at the bottom of his soul a divine spark of goodness. And this would allow him to become a new man through a moral revolution. But Kant does not appear at all on the lists of people suspected of Gnosticism. Okay, Kant wasn't actually a Gnostic, didn't have Gnostic influences. Colliano is analyzing Gnosticism through this dualistic lens, and this is why he made the association with Kant, basically. So, I can say, like, that basically I could draw parallels between Christianity and socialism or Marxism, and I would find a lot of commonalities, a lot of elements which are basically the same elements. And would I then say that Marxism is Christian? Would I say that socialism is Christian? Because it shares some moral attitudes, some moral values, helping the poor, basically, or helping the oppressed in some way. And this is like a parallel that Christianity has also with postmodernism. So is postmodernism Christian for this reason? So some people actually made this connection. They said that look at how Christianity appeared. It was this religion of the lower classes, of the slaves, of the poor, and so on. And then it slightly went up to the upper classes, but it started as this religion of the oppressed, and it's similar to what postmodernism and wokeism is kind of doing, basically. And yeah, I mean, is it justified to call wokeism Christian? I don't think it is, despite the parallels. And yeah, you can always find some parallels, but if the essential core doesn't correspond with the philosophy you are trying to compare or associate, why use that word to describe it? It's misleading. It's actually a misuse of that word. So let's go into the traits of Gnosticism, basically. So what are the defining traits of Gnosticism? So we can talk about the idea of the demiurge, basically, because the demiurge is kind of unique as a figure in Gnosticism. I mean, you can find it also in Platonism, but in Gnosticism it takes a kind of unique connotation, that of a lower god, a lower creator. So man is somehow, or he can be superior to its own creator. So yes, you can you can draw some parallels there with some modern ideology, maybe, and also with atheism, but it would not be actually that accurate, because the demiurge is not like the only god we can find. There's actually the higher god, and Gnosticism is not an atheist philosophy. Gnosticism is theistic. It has a spiritual hierarchy. All these things are absent in Marxism. Hierarchies as well are absent in Marxism. And yes, you have basically the demiurge. You have this dualism of the worlds, of the physical world, the world of matter, and the pleroma. This is totally absent in Marxism. You have hierarchies within humanity, basically. So you have the helics, you have the psychics, and you have the pneumatics. And all of them have different qualities. And obviously, the pneumatics are at the top, the helics are at the bottom. Do you have this in Marxism? Do you have this in wokeism? No, because everyone is equal. There's an emphasis on equality, where the Gnostics, were they actually equalitarians? No, they weren't. They believed in this kind of hierarchy. They weren't egalitarian, basically. So what other difference we can find? So we can find what I said before, the emphasis on gnosis, which is spiritual in nature. So then we have like this attempt by Lindsay to tie the demiurge, the demiurgic figure, to basically the bourgeois class. And it's forgive me for this, but it's really a stupid metaphor. So it's stupid because it doesn't work. I mean, okay, so let's talk about the demiurge. He was like the result of an abortion of Sophia, basically, and Sophia was the spiritual being, and so on. And the demiurge created then the physical world, and he thought he was the only god here. Okay, then this is the story of the demiurge. He is ignorant. He doesn't know that he's not the real god, and so on. And now let's look at the bourgeois class. So the bourgeois class basically appeared with modernity. and it started to grow slowly, and it started to have more and more power. And the aristocracy and the ancien regime basically started to lose it. So there is a dialectic here. So you have those who were before in power, the aristocracy, who are brought down by the bourgeois class, which becomes the dominant class, basically. And Marxism then tries to subvert the new order that was created in modernity, that of the capitalist bourgeoisie, basically, because then you have the creation of the proletariat, and they wanted to subvert the bourgeois class. So where is this dialectic in Gnosticism? Does the demiurge actually subvert Sophia? Does he subvert the real God, the higher God? No. So the metaphor doesn't work for various reasons. So if you want like to say, oh, so the bourgeois are evil and so is the demiurge, okay. I mean, that's not really you're not saying a lot. Like it's not a parallel which actually works. So Lindsay said that basically he told about these connections to Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk was like he remained like mouth open and his jaw dropped and was no, now everything makes sense. Okay, so maybe these kind of things work with someone like Charlie Kirk, who isn't actually educated enough on the subject. But if you try this with someone who actually is, then you won't get the same reaction. You will get a really different reaction. Like people will laugh in your face, basically, because what you're saying doesn't have a solid basis. So I know there is this current, starting with, well, not starting with Voegelin, but he was like the most eminent like figure of this sort of thinking, but it doesn't have a solid basis. It doesn't have it because wokeism and Marxism operate on completely different frameworks. So Lindsay tries also to criticize Hermeticism. And remember that he is an atheist and his framework is that of a modernist. So when he tries to analyze Hermeticism, he basically looks at the idea that like the ultimate truth is that you are God, basically, and the basic theology of Hermeticism, God is unconscious and so on, which is basically the concept that you can find also in the book of Job written by Jung, and we will return to this because it's important. The answer to Job, not the book of Job. My bad. So, basically, the claim that Lindsay makes is that due to this view, you have to be a megalomaniac to actually believe this. I mean, that you are God. But he doesn't understand mysticism. He doesn't understand the traditions of the East. I mean, you can have union with God. Also in Christianity, well, people like Meister Eckhart were regarded as, let's say, heretics and so on, because they implied an absolute unity. But in hesychasm, in Orthodox Christianity, you still have a union with God through theosis, though if you read Orthodox theologians, they will always specify that that kind of union is not a union of identity, but one of energies, basically. So the distinction between the individual person and God remains like the same, but you participate in the nature of God, basically. And yeah, it's an important distinction. But from a modernist perspective, I mean, Lindsay, to be coherent with his claims, would have to claim also that Jesus Christ was a megalomaniac, because he also claimed he was God. So, was he a megalomaniac? I mean, also a lot of mystics and all of, I don't know, all of the yoga practitioners and so on who try to achieve this, they're all megalomaniacs. They they're trying to become God, basically. But he obviously, having just a modernist perspective and framework doesn't allow you to understand the level of things, like the distinction between the eternal and the becoming, and the fact that it's not the individual person who becomes God, but it's its essence, basically, who is identical with God. Like Atman is Brahman, and Brahman is Atman, basically. So of course, if you have that framework, you will misunderstand Hermeticism, you will misunderstand Gnosticism, you'll misunderstand mysticism, and all religions, basically. You will misunderstand them because you do not have the actual tools to interpret them correctly. So, returning to the concept of God in Hermeticism, like I said, it's similar to that of Carl Jung in his book Answer to Job. So, why is this important? So, it's important because James Lindsay is pointing fingers like Marxism is Gnostic, wokeism is Gnostic. And then he's having talks with Jordan Peterson, agreeing with him on a lot of things. Jordan Peterson, who, if you go on his reading list, you'll find a lot of books written by Jung, and he himself claims to be a Jungian. And if you look at the framework on which he operates, he's more of a Gnostic than any pure Marxist or pure wokeist you can find on Earth, basically. Like, it's extremely ironic. I made a meme about this because it's so funny. I mean, he's pointing the Gnostic finger, I mean, to all those ideologies, and then he's talking with someone who is actually a little closer. He was actually accused of being a modern Gnostic, alongside basically John Vervaeke, though he's not a Gnostic. John Vervaeke is more of a modern Neoplatonist, and Jordan Peterson, I don't know what to call him. He's not a Gnostic, but he shares a bit of like the same framework on which the Gnostics worked, and he is actually quite influenced by Carl Jung. Jung, who was really dealing with Gnosticism. If you want to call someone a modern Gnostic, though he wasn't a real Gnostic, like he didn't accept all the ideas in Gnosticism, but it's like a lot of his work concentrates on Gnosticism, so that we have actually a Jung Codex, which are some texts from Nag Hammadi, some Gnostic texts from Nag Hammadi, which are actually called the Jung Codex in honor of Carl Jung. You have Carl Jung, who actually incorporated a lot of the Gnostic myths and alchemy and Hermeticism into his work, and you're not seeing him. Like you're blind to Carl Jung. Carl Jung doesn't exist. The Marxists are the Gnostics. No, the woke people are Gnostics. So it's extremely funny. It's extremely funny, but then you have also like cultural things like the Matrix. The Matrix was made by the Wachowski brothers, sisters, whatever. I don't know what they are, but it's a movie which has Gnostic elements, and it has also postmodern elements to it. And yeah, you have like you can have the two converging together. It's not something weird. You can have people who say they are Marxist and also Gnostics at the same time, but again, there's no direct connection between the two. There's no connection. I don't know where he actually found that connection. I mean, he found it in Voegelin, basically, and Voegelin found it in some other person, but it's wrong. It's not the actual connection that you can make. So if you look at the esoteric like history, or you look at esoteric movements of the last centuries, you have, I don't know, in theosophy, you have Annie Besant. Annie Besant was a feminist, so she was a leftist. You have Eliphas Levi. He had a socialist background. You have Jiddu Krishnamurti, who actually, when you hear him talk, he has this like deconstructive way of doing things, like, and he kind of sounds a bit like a leftist, and he was a product of theosophy in some ways, though. I mean, he got rid of that, and I mean, there are like some elements there. Like you can find also like the modern state, the nation state was made by the Freemasons who dealt with the occult, with esotericism. I mean, of course, I mean, there's this thing there. It's not Marxism, though. It's not wokeism. There are elements of you can draw parallels. There are influences of like some esoteric school on the culture, somewhat, but Marxism comes from the opposite pole, basically, and it's not Gnostic. I mean, yeah, it's a bit weird. So yeah, one more thing that I forgot to say is that James Lindsay has this weird thing. He has this weird weird reply to like criticisms, because this is not the first criticism that he receives. I'm sure of it. I mean, I think he received the same criticism from other people, and he says that, well, you're using Gnosticism in this narrow sense, in this narrow Christian sense, whereas Gnosticism can be a broader thing or something like that. And at a certain point, he kind of becomes self-aware because he basically says that, well, maybe we need a better word. You think we need a better word. No, it's not that we need a better word. We need to stop using that word. That's the actual thing. So James Lindsay says that he has been receiving this kind of criticism primarily from Christians who say to him that, well, Gnosticism is actually this, and it's not compatible with what you're describing. And basically, he says that, well, it's not just in this narrow sense in which it can be used and so on. But then he actually draws from that narrow sense. I mean, he uses elements like the demiurge, he uses elements like the alienation, which is to be found in Christian Gnosticism, and then he attributes those same elements to modern ideologies. I mean, so what's your reply to that criticism? It doesn't make sense, because you're still doing the same thing. You're still using that definition of Gnosticism, that those elements from historical Gnosticism, to attribute them to modern ideologies. You're using the demiurge to say that the bourgeois class is basically the demiurge. You're using the concept of the prison, like to say that woke people feel like they're in a prison, like, or like Foucault, who described society as a prison, and all the social constructs as being this prison which keeps you locked, basically. So you are using that narrow sense, and you are taking those elements and associating them with modern tendencies. So that criticism is extremely legitimate, and your reply to it doesn't make sense. Again, so let's look actually at the core of the problem. So look at someone like Judith Butler. So does she say she is a Valentinian Gnostic? Does she say that her ideas come from Gnosticism? And I mean, you can say that, oh, okay, maybe she's not saying this explicitly, but it's clearly there. No, it's not. And no. But what is she actually saying? She's saying that her ideas are basically based on the principles of democracy, liberal democracy. What she's trying to do is to bring about, let's say, a freer expression, a fuller expression of democracy, of liberal democracy. So, again, James Lindsay, what are your principles? What's your framework? If not that of being an atheist, a materialist, and a liberal Democrat, basically. I mean, you are standing on the same exact principles on which Judith Butler is standing. The only difference is that she is taking those principles to, let's say, an extreme conclusion. And you're not, because you are more of a conservative in some way. But, I mean, that is the root of the ideology. Liberal, modern, liberal and democratic values are the root of wokeism and Marxism. Those are the actual source. It's not Gnosticism. It's not. It's Gnosticism is the opposite. It has so many elements which are in contrast with wokeism and Marxism, which clearly do not fit into that model. So I hope that the people, at least the people who see this, understand that Gnosticism has little to do with Marxism, because the reason I made this video is because I saw some friends that actually fell for this connection, basically. So I was kind of concerned when I saw this thing first, and then I saw James Lindsay, and yeah, I mean, I needed to have like a strong reaction to it, because it doesn't help to clarify things. It only makes them worse. I mean, it brings about confusion, because it's not something coherent. It's something really incoherent, and it's really arbitrary. And Voegelin, correct me if I'm wrong, he regretted using the word Gnostic and Gnosticism later on. I mean, because it's not the correct way of using the word Gnosticism. So I hope this was helpful.